this video, I'm going to show you all the steps that we recommend for finding out what habitats you have in your NPMS square. So just going to open up my post box here and see if my pack has arrived. Or maybe you haven't necessarily got to wait for the post. You've got your email from us, from NPMS support, and you should be able to have all of your attachments on the email, including your map. So don't forget to download that, and then you can either print that out yourself or you can look at it from here. Also, if it's been a while since we've got one of those emails from us, remember you can also get your square download, your PDF, off the website. So once you've signed in, you can go to create plots and enter data, and under that you've got view squares and create plots, and then here you can find view or edit square information just under the top, and here you've got the download square details PDF here, and that'll just get downloaded for you to view. Now it might be that you've got a lovely coloured map like this showing you roughly where all the NPMS habitats are, and it's nicely referenced and colour coded here. So we've got all of this pink, which means heathland, we've got some lovely green here meaning broadleaf woodland, maybe some marsh and fen, which is a different colour green, and all of that. However, it might be that you've got one a little bit more on the bare side like this. I mean, this has got a little bit of broadleaf woodland here, you can see, but maybe you've got absolutely none of them, and that's just because it's using an sort of knowledge of where the habitats might be, but they haven't necessarily been done to what's really on the ground. So that's where we need to go out and have a look. I would also take out your guidance notes and your species list. Having all of your equipment with you means you can double check what lists for what habitats, and also you can just double check how to do all of the different parts of the methodology while you're there. Now you might be somebody who's got so many wonderful plant ID books, but on your first trip out, really we're going to leave these behind, but it might be handy just to take your NPMS guide with you. So you're getting ready to go out on your first little explore of your 1 kilometre square or your monad. So it might be really useful at this point to take an OS map if you have it, or if you've got access to something like that online. OS do a really good app as well. And don't forget your 1 kilometre square map, and you basically just got to find where you need to go to explore. So look at where the public footpaths are, where the lanes are, and just go and have a little explore around and see what habitats that you can find. Okay, so you found a bit of your square and you're thinking, right, what is it? What habitats have I got here? So one of the things that you'll obviously be referring to is your map, and you'll be looking at trying to work out where you are using your OS map as well, and you'll think, right, well this is saying that I've got, I don't know, broadleaf woodland on here. So then you'll be like, okay, let's do a check. If however you haven't got anything on your map with all the pretty colours, then it's going to be a case of having a look. So as you can see where I'm standing right now, I've got some broadleaf woodland behind me. It's still early in the season, so you know it's hard to tell sometimes what you've got, but in the middle of this woodland there's also a big patch of grassland that's managed as lowland grassland here. So you know, don't always assume that if you're looking from the air that you're only going to have what you can see on the aerial as broadleaf woodland. There might be other habitats within it. In those circumstances, you want to make sure that your plot is set up in only one of those habitat types. So I wouldn't want to set it up over there and have half of it woodland and half of it grassland, because that's just going to be confusing for you, and also it's going to produce crazy kind of data and you're not going to be able to categorize it as one habitat type. So in that instance, I might want to set up a plot, say if this is a really big wood, at one far end that's woodland and maybe one in this grassland area, especially if you haven't maybe got any other semi-natural habitats within your square. This can be one of your best resources in terms of figuring out what habitat you've got. If you go to the specific habitat sections, then it's got, not only has it got some useful photographs and examples, but it's also got specific things about the topography or the soil type that you would likely expect to find. One of the things about the grassland habitats particularly is the first thing you want to make sure you know is how high up you are. Are we talking about being in the lowlands, in which case you've got the broad category of lowland grasslands split again, or are you in the uplands, in which case you've got montane grassland? And it can vary slightly depending on the type of grassland, but essentially it's mostly if you're above 400 or 500 metres, then you're going to be in the montane zone and you'll want to be looking at upland grassland. However, if you're below 400 or 300 metres, that sort of area, then you're probably going to be looking at the lowlands. So for example, in our guide, it says that if you are below 300 metres, that's above sea level, then and it's looking kind of acidic characteristics, then that would be within the lowland category of dry acidic grassland. However, if it was above 300, then you're probably looking at the montane acid grassland. Whereas things like the calcareous, it's the 500 metre is the point that you need to change from one to the other. So if you're below 500, then you're just in dry calcareous within lowland grassland. And if you're above 500 metres, then you want to be in the montane calcareous grassland. With the damp grassland and the meadows and pastures, it's about the 400 metre mark. So again, if you're below that, then you're within neutral pastures and meadows or neutral damp meadows. Above 400 metres, then you might be looking at maybe a completely different habitat, maybe like a flush or something that's in the montane region. It's a case of getting down on your hands and knees and really having a look at what the soil's like. It's hard to tell in certain places, especially if it's well trodden. The paths can often be quite different to the main parts of the grassland. Something like the fact that we've got lots of anthills, really well established anthills here, suggests that it's probably quite nice grassland and it isn't intensively farmed because it probably hasn't been ploughed up. I mean, obviously within the woodland here that would be unlikely anyway, but if you're in a more open bit of grassland, the fact that there's established anthills can often tell you significant things about the fact that it's old grassland. Things like the types of the grasses that you've got, whether you've got those really fine and thin grasses, might be suggestive of maybe slightly more acidic grassland, just because some of those species tend to like it. Equally, you could still get some of those in calcareous, but maybe you're going to get a mix of some more broader leaved grasses. However, when it comes to things like, have you got damp or dry grassland, then really it's a case of looking, is it physically wet when you're walking on it? Can you hear the squelching? Are there flooded areas, pools maybe? Are there lots of rushes and sedges and that sort of dominating in parts? Then you might be looking at some neutral damp grassland. However, if it is dry, then that's where we really need to start looking at the sort of surrounding features, maybe something on the map. I mean, maybe it's written down as downland and it's actually on a hillside and it's quite rocky, in which case if it's got downs written on it, then it's quite likely that it might be calcareous grassland, chalkland. At this time of year, it can be quite difficult to tell maybe what species you've got, but if we have a little look down here, even though there's not a lot, there's nothing really flowering at the moment, you can just see things poking up, and there's the very, very characteristic, if you can see that here, let me switch the camera around. You can see these lovely little pinnate type leaflets here coming up, and if you find where they're coming from, you can see that they form a little basal rosette here, and that's salad burnet. Now that tells me that it's quite likely that we might have some calcareous grassland here. Other features like the fact that as I was walking in, the soil was pretty kind of clayey and light coloured, suggesting that maybe we've got some calcareous soil here. One of the other things is, have you got shrubs, low-growing shrubs like heathers or bilberries? In which case, any grassland that's likely to occur between them is going to be probably acidic grassland. And depending again on the sort of level you are in terms of altitude, whether that's going to be lowland or upland. It's important to remember that if you've got over 25% of those bilberries and those heathers within your plot, then actually it needs to be under dry heathland rather than dry acid grassland. You're likely to get variation across a whole site, so you might get some bits that would be, if you set a plot there, would be dry heathland, and other bits that are likely to be more like the dry acid grassland, because they usually form that kind of mosaic of habitats together. So that marshy grassland, that neutral damp grassland, that one, essentially you're going to find that you've got a lot of probably more broader leaved grasses, the sort of Yorkshire fogs, the foxtails, the creeping bent though as well, maybe tufted hairgrass that likes it quite damp. And then you're going to have things like buttercups, meadow buttercup, creeping buttercup, marsh marigold, ragged robin, lots of rushes maybe in between as well. However, if you've got, that tends to be sort of more neutral base, as we said, so this is neutral damp grassland. Whereas if you've got something that's far more acidic in nature, with things like purple moorgrass and rush pastures in sort of upland locations, then maybe if it's really wet, that wants to be included under the marsh and fen category. One of the really tricky broad habitat categories to even know if you've got that, let alone then break it down into the fine habitat categories, is marsh and fen. And it's worth saying that marshy grassland should still go under neutral damp grassland if it's sort of mostly grassland dominated, whereas fens, for example, because they're usually permanently waterlogged, they're kind of really dominated by those much taller ruderal sort of, so like tall herbs and sedges and that sort of thing usually dominate a fen, and normally fens are very species rich because they're usually base rich, alkaline. Within the broad habitat category, marsh and fen, essentially it's all permanently waterlogged sort of habitats, and that obviously comprises both the flushes and the springs, as well as those much larger expanses of fen and mires. Essentially is a mire where very slow moving water is sort of moving through a valley or a depression in a kind of heathland acidic type habitat. Whereas your fen is usually much more base rich and species rich, with sort of tall herb and sedge vegetation dominating, but still very, very waterlogged. I haven't gone through all the habitats in this video, as that would be an information overload. However, check out our habitat specific webinars on our YouTube channel for more information on some of those broad and fine habitats. Don't forget to subscribe to be notified of the latest videos that we've created. If you feel you need extra help deciphering your habitats, then do not worry. You can get help. Take photos of your habitat close up and overall views, and then either send to NPMS support or a local mentor. We are all here as part of the NPMS team to help you.